September 25, 1943, Bay of Biscay, aboard KG-100 operations bunker, Brittany, France. The bunker walls dripped with a cold, chalky damp as Luftwaffe technicians crowded around a scarred wooden table illuminated by a single red-shaded lamp, their breath faintly visible in the chilled coastal air. Outside, the Atlantic wind howled against the concrete, carrying the distant thrum of Junkers engines warming up on the tarmac. Stacked in the center of the room lay the classified briefing folders, thin, gray, and stamped Sonderklasse, each containing diagrams of a weapon unlike anything the Allies had yet faced, the Henschel Hs 293, a remote-controlled glide bomb fitted with Walter rocket boosters, its wings stubby and angular, its belly packed with a 500-kilogram explosive charge, and its nose rigged with a delicate FUG-203 Kehl receiver that allowed the bombardier to guide it by joystick through the air like some kind of mechanical falcon. Major Erich Bode, commander of Kampfgeschwader 100's anti-shipping unit, stood over the table with his gloved hands resting on the edges, studying the newest intercept patterns from British and Free French convoys slipping into the Bay of Biscay at dawn. Allied transport ships had grown bolder since midsummer, pressing deeper into waters the Kriegsmarine could no longer control, relying on radar pickets and anti-aircraft screens to ward off U-boats and dive bombers. But none of them had ever faced a weapon that soared above sea spray, untouched by torpedo nets, too fast for flak crews to track, and too distant for a human pilot to be shot out of the sky. In the corner, a technician adjusted the frequency dials on the Kehl transmitter, low whistle, then a faint click, before calling out that the signal was steady. The briefing turned tense as Bode read the final lines of the decrypted Allied convoy report. At least 4 cargo ships, 2 escorts, and 1 probable destroyer, all lumbering westward in tight formation. Perfect targets, but heavily guarded. Perfect conditions, but only if the HS 293 worked as promised outside of training trials. The memory of earlier failures lingered: receiver interference, booster misfires, bombs losing signal and plunging randomly into the sea. The Luftwaffe claimed the technical issues were solved. The men in the room weren't so sure. A distant rumble shook dust from the rafters as the first Do 217 bombers rolled toward the runway, each one slung with an HS 293 beneath its wings, the weapon's rocket bell still blackened from static testing. Bode snapped his folder shut. Outside, the surf hammered the rocks in the half-light of dawn, and the cold wind carried the faint scent of salt, oil, and metal, a smell that always preceded bad weather or battle. As he walked toward the waiting aircraft, one of the radio officers jogged up beside him with a newly received intelligence note. An Allied escort had joined the convoy sometime during the night, its profile uncertain, possibly a Hunt-class destroyer known for aggressive anti-aircraft tactics. That meant more guns, more radar, more ways this mission could unravel before the bombs even separated from their pylons. Bode paused on the damp tarmac, scanning the horizon where the sky met the sea in a thin steel blue line. The HS 293 offered a promise, a revolution in naval warfare, a weapon that might break Allied shipping lanes wide open. But as another gust of wind whipped across the airfield and the clouds thickened with approaching storm fronts, he felt the uneasy weight of something else, something he couldn't name. Whether it was the strange silence between the waves or the way the bomber crews avoided each other's eyes, it pressed on him with quiet insistence. And then came the final message from the signals hut, an encrypted fragment indicating the convoy might have received an unscheduled radar alert earlier that morning, a detail that made no operational sense unless they had detected something Germany hadn't meant for them to see. Bode folded the slip slowly, the paper softening in the moisture of his glove. and for the first time since receiving the mission order, he wondered if the Allies somehow knew what was coming, or worse, if the new weapon's radio frequencies had already been compromised before it ever reached the target. September 25, 1943, over the Bay of Biscay, 10:41 hours. The Do 217 E-5 bomber lurched as it punched through a bank of low gray cloud, the airframe vibrating under sudden pockets of turbulence that made the Walter-boosted HS-293 sway uneasily beneath the starboard wing, its stubby fins glinting in the thin morning light as Major Eric Boda steadied himself against the bombardier's seatback, eyes fixed on the churning Atlantic below, where whitecaps tore across the surface like shredded cloth. The convoy was out there somewhere. 4 cargo ships, 2 escorts, and the newly added, still unidentified warship picked up by German radio intercepts before dawn. And every minute the clouds held would delay visual contact, costing precious time and fuel as the bombers zigzagged along their plotted approach path. Around him, the Do 217 felt alive, its BMW engines thundering with a deep, hollow vibration that resonated through the metal skin like the heartbeat of something both powerful and fragile. The bombardier, Oberfeldwebel Kruger, adjusted the Kehl transmitter strapped into the console beside him, his finger tapping lightly at the tuning dial as he muttered about signal drift. That complaint hung like a warning in the cramped cabin. Even the best HS-293 trials had shown moments of interference, brief lapses in the control link, or the eerie, unpredictable flutter when the bomb refused to command or responded with a slight delay. A weapon that could glide and then rocket toward a ship under remote control was impressive, revolutionary even, but it was not flawless, and the men who operated it knew better than the engineers in Berlin how narrow the line was between innovation and catastrophe. Boda leaned over the bombardier's shoulder as the clouds thinned. Below them, the sea broadened into a pale, sparkling plain. Then he saw it, a faint pattern of wakes slicing clean lines across the water. Convoy. He motioned sharply, and the intercom crackled as he ordered the formation to tighten. 4 Do 217s shifted into a staggered attack posture, sliding down toward their designated altitudes. As the sky cleared fully, the convoy resolved into shape, the 2 cargo vessels riding heavily at mid-column, a tanker at the rear, an ammunition ship in front, and the escorts weaving an outer screen. But it was the additional ship that caught Boda's eye. A low-slung silhouette, sharper and faster than the others, its gun turrets already elevated. A Hunt-class destroyer, exactly the type the radio officer had worried about. The destroyer's radar mast spun in precise, methodical arcs. It was searching. They were not unnoticed. "They've seen us," the navigator whispered. Even at this range, puffs of gray-black smoke erupted from the destroyer's barrels as the first bursts of anti-aircraft fire clawed upward, too distant to threaten, but enough to warn. Boda inhaled deeply, the air inside the cabin smelling of hydraulic fluid, sweat, and heated metal. "Continue," he ordered firmly. "We attacked in sequence. No deviations." The bombers descended to their release height, about 4,000 feet, catching sunlight along their wings as they aligned for the attack run. Kruger flicked open the safety cover on the Kehl transmitter, the guiding joystick standing upright like the handle of some primitive lethal instrument. The device looked almost laughably simple compared to the destruction it promised. Wooden grip, narrow metal stem, a few toggles that controlled pitch and roll commands sent by radio pulse to the Ku tail receiver mounted on the HS-293's nose. The bomber's belly camera was activated, feeding a grainy image to a small screen so the bombardier could see the bomb's trajectory after release. "Signal check," Kruger muttered, shifting the dial. A faint tone beeped in the headset. "Clear, for now." The first Do 217 peeled away, lowering its nose as the bombardier released the HS-293. The bomb dropped cleanly, its wings catching the air as it glided outward. Then the Walter rocket ignited, a bright white plume blasting from its rear as it accelerated. The other crews watched the bomb streak forward, glinting like a silver arrow. The convoy reacted instantly. The destroyer swung sharply port side, tracers ripping through the sky. The HS-293's bright flare, attached for visual tracking, danced erratically as Kruger in the lead bomber guided it with small joystick movements. "Signal interference, minor," someone reported over the encrypted channel. Boda felt sweat bead under his collar as the HS-293 wobbled in its descent, then corrected, slicing through the air toward the escort ship on the convoy's flank. Seconds stretched. The destroyer's flak intensified, shells bursting in orange blossoms of fire across the glide path. The lead bomb hit just off the ship's bow, close but not direct, sending a towering plume of water skyward. The shockwave vibrated Boda's bomber even at altitude. "Corrected too late," Kruger hissed. "Second wave, prepare!" The remaining 3 Do-217s adjusted approach vectors. Boda's bomber shifted far right, choosing a shallower attack angle. The other 2 banked left, intending to crossfire the convoy and force the escorts to split their defenses. The destroyer had now fully committed, its guns blazing, its bow cutting white arcs across the ocean as it maneuvered aggressively. "Release," Boda commanded. Kruger pulled the lever. The HS-293 dropped away. For a moment it was simply falling, an oddly graceful, silent shape, before the rocket ignited with a thunderous flare, the blast shaking the Do-217. The bomb surged forward. Kruger gripped the joystick, eyes locked on the tiny screen where the bomb's bright flare marked its course. Good signal," he muttered as a zero deflection burst from below shook the bomber. Shrapnel pinged against the fuselage. The destroyer's shells now reached their altitude, bursting dangerously close. "Hold steady," Boda barked. On the screen, the glide bomb angled slightly left, correcting for wind. The destroyer turned again, cutting across the water with precise intention. This wasn't random maneuvering. It was deliberate response, as if the ship understood how the weapon functioned. "They're zigzagging with purpose," the navigator muttered. "Not typical avoidance." Kruger cursed as a sudden burst of static cut through the signal. The bomb wobbled, the flare blurred, then stabilized. "Interference, source unknown, continuing," he muttered through clenched teeth. Another second of silence, too long. Boda stared at the flare, now drifting slightly higher than intended. "Adjust, Kruger." "I'm trying, signal's cutting, hold." The bomb steadied again, then the static cleared completely. Clean tone, perfect connection, as if nothing had happened. Kruger guided the bomb downward. The destroyer turned too sharply this time. It exposed its broadside. The HS-293 descended in a clean, slicing arc. Time compressed. The flare grew brighter. The screen flickered. And then, impact. A bright, tearing explosion split the sea as the bomb detonated against the destroyer's midsection. Water and metal erupted upward in a column of flame, smoke, and debris. The destroyer lurched violently, its forward momentum collapsing as fires roared along its deck. Even from altitude, the damage was unmistakable. A direct hit. The first in combat history for a radio-controlled weapon. The crew erupted in a brief cheer, quickly silenced as Boda raised his hand. The battle was not finished. Through the smoke, the remaining escorts tightened their formation. The convoy was turning away, scattering, but not in panic. In coordination. Mitchell's suspicion struck him cold. The interference, the unexpected maneuvering. The convoy wasn't just reacting to danger. It was reacting like it already knew what the HS-293 could do. And as Kruger checked the transmitter for a second release, hands trembling slightly, Boda saw it. A new radar signature approaching fast from the west. Aircraft. Not German. Not slow. Not friendly. October 1, 1943. Over the western approaches. 11:22 hours. The warning came not through sound, but through vibration. An unfamiliar tremor in the Do-217's airframe that made the instrument needles shimmer as Meyer Erich Bode leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the sudden spike in the radar operator's voice, the man shouting over the intercom that fast-moving aircraft were approaching from the west, closing at a speed no German pilot expected to see this far out over the Bay of Biscay. Even before the operator clarified the silhouettes, Bode knew the truth was already unfolding. The Allies had scrambled interceptors, likely Beaufighters or Mosquitoes, aircraft built for speed, altitude, and long-range harassment, aircraft that the Germans had feared would one day appear over these waters. And now they were coming straight toward the crippled destroyer, the hit convoy, and the KG-100 strike team. The bomber's BMW engines groaned as Bode shoved the throttles forward, the sudden power shaking the airframe as the Doe 217 banked hard, climbing into a shallow arc as the ocean spun below in a blur of white-slashed waves. Kruger swore under his breath as the Kehl transmitter, while still open from the attack run, slid across its track, nearly falling from its clamp before he caught it. They had no time to release another HS-293. Not now. Not with enemy interceptors diving toward them at closing speeds too high to counter. "How many?" Bode barked, gripping the yoke tightly. Static crackled. Then the operator's voice returned. 4. No, 6. Multiple returns. Coming fast." The first shapes burst through the haze moments later. Dark wings, twin engines, angled noses that cut the sky like blades. Beaufighters. Their silhouettes were unmistakable, broad, predatory, their 4 Hispano cannons already flashing streams of fire. They aimed not for the convoy, but for the bombers themselves. One of the German Doe 217s broke formation too late. The lead Beaufighter dived, guns blazing, ripping through the bomber's starboard wing in a clean, merciless sweep. Flames erupted instantly, engulfing the engine. The Doe 217 rolled right, spiraling downward in a trail of black smoke before vanishing into the sea with a violent hiss that sent steam curling upward. No parachutes, none at all. "They were waiting for us," Kruger breathed, voice thin and disbelieving. Bode didn't reply. He didn't need to. The truth was undeniable. The Allies knew about the HS-293. They knew the bomber's approach. They knew the release altitudes and the escape vectors. The German weapon had not just been confronted, it had been anticipated. But how? There hadn't been time for captured wreckage to be studied. No spies had been identified, no transmissions intercepted. Yet the Allied fighters were here, exactly where they needed to be. "Break east!" Bode shouted into the radio, but the sky was already a maze of tracer fire, smoke, and twisting contrails. The remaining Doe 217 scattered. One descended sharply, releasing chaff in a desperate attempt to confuse the approaching aircraft. Another climbed too steeply. Its overloaded frames stalled, forcing the pilot to drop toward the waves just to regain lift. The Beaufighters split into 2 attack groups, 3 diving into the chaos of the German retreat, 3 banking high above to cut off any attempt at escape. Their discipline was unnerving, their formation precise. These were not random patrols or routine interceptors. They had been directed here with clear purpose. Bode's bomber shook violently as a volley of cannon shells traced past the tail, shattering part of the rudder. He grunted as the controls stiffened, the aircraft resisting his efforts like a wounded animal straining against restraint. "Throttle up," he snapped. Kruger braced himself, eyes flicking between the bomb sight feed and the porthole where he could now see the Beaufighter's silhouette sliding into firing position. "He's on us! He's on us!" Bode rolled sharply left, forcing the bomber into a stomach-churning dive. The ocean surged upward in a violent blue rush. The aircraft's frame groaned, wings flexing dangerously, before Bode leveled them inches above stall speed. Cannon fire streaked past overhead. The Beaufighter overshot. Not much time. Bode hauled the bomber upward, using the dive to slingshot them onto a zigzag course southeast. "Where are the others?" the operator replied, panic cracking through his voice. "One headed north, one down, one unknown." Another explosion rocked the sky. A second Doe 217 disintegrated mid-air, its wing torn off by a Beaufighter's burst. Debris spiraled downward like burning leaves. Bode clenched his jaw. The mission was unraveling. Not tactically, strategically. The very existence of the HS-293 was no longer a secret. That could only mean one thing. The Allies were listening. Not to Berlin, not to bomber chatter, but to the weapon itself. The interference during the attack run, the momentary signal drift, the strange leveling of the static, the convoys' coordinated evasive patterns, the destroyers' adaptive maneuvering. "Kruger," Bode said, voice low and steady despite the chaos around them. "Check the Kehl frequency modulation again." Kruger blinked, confused. "Now? Under fire?" "Now!" Kruger twisted the dial. The tone in the headset flickered strangely, once, twice, then stabilized with an unsettling clarity. "Sir, something's wrong." "Describe it." "The signal is too clean, too perfect." Bode felt his stomach tighten. "As if someone else is reinforcing it?" Kruger's face paled. "Or reading it." That was the moment everything clicked. The Allied maneuvers, the ambush, the sudden arrival of the Beaufighters exactly as the attack run ended. If the HS-293 guidance link had been intercepted, or worse, mirrored, then the Allies not only knew how the bomb functioned, they predicted where it was being used. They're triangulating our signal, the bomb's control frequency. It's giving us away. The reality hit like a cold fist. The weapon meant to hide the bomber had betrayed its position. Not because the bomb malfunctioned, but because the Allies were listening. A fresh burst of fire ripped across the sky as another Beaufighter swung into attack. Bode shoved the yoke down hard. The bomber plunged again, skimming the wave top so low that saltwater spray struck the undercarriage. The Beaufighter followed, engines screaming. Kruger unlatched the side-mounted MG-131 and fired a desperate burst. The tracers arced wide, then caught the Beaufighter's nose in a glancing strike, just enough to force the British pilot to break off and climb for a cleaner angle. "We can't outrun them," the navigator said, voice hollow. "No," Bode muttered, "but we can vanish." Ahead, a low band of sea fog drifted across the water, dense, unbroken, thick enough to swallow a bomber whole. Bode angled sharply, dragging the Doe 217 into the fog bank just as another spray of cannon shells tore through the air behind them. The world vanished into white. Moisture streamed across the canopy. The engine's roar muffled into a damp, echoing hum. The fog swallowed them completely. "Radar off," Bode ordered. "Radio off. Everything silent." For a moment, only the dull throb of the engines remained. No gunfire, no shadows, no pursuit. Just the thick, wet silence of the cloud. But beneath that silence pulsed a deeper uncertainty, something far more dangerous than the Beaufighters outside. If the Allies could track the HS-293 guidance link, then the weapon's secrecy was dead, and KG-100's greatest advantage had vanished in a single hour. Bode exhaled slowly, staring at the condensation beating on the glass. "We've unleashed a weapon they already know how to counter, and they won't stop until they destroy every bomber carrying it." The fog thinned slightly. The sea reappeared below in streaks of gray. Kruger sat back, exhausted, sweat mingling with the cold mist on his skin. "So what now?" he whispered. Bode tightened his grip on the yoke. "Now," he said, guiding the damaged bomber toward the distant French coast, "we figure out who leaked the frequency and how much the Allies really understand." A pause. The engines hummed, the fog swirled, and then, with a heaviness that settled deeper than the loss of men or machines, Bode added, "Because if they can read our bombs, they can read our future."